Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. We love to pick some interesting material and just go deep. And today, we're talking all about emotions.
Mhm.
We've got some fascinating audio excerpts from this lecture series called Emotions Revealed.
Yeah.
And these lectures, they're not just kind of surface level stuff. This is really getting into like the nitty gritty, the science of how our feelings actually work. So,
Yeah, they really get into the internal experience of emotion,
yeah.
how it manifests in our bodies and things like that.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the most powerful examples from this lecture series is the story of Betty Shirley. I mean, talk about a story that just grabs you right from the start.
Yeah. A mother grieving the loss of her son.
You can almost feel the weight of her grief just listening to her talk about it.
And her story really illustrates the difference between sadness and what the lecture calls agony.
Okay.
Sadness, they argue, is a feeling of resignation.
Right.
It's a sense of helplessness.
Mm.
But agony is more of a protest against the loss.
Hmm.
It's a struggle against the pain.
When you think about that distinction between sadness and agony, it makes you wonder if expressing those raw feelings of agony is actually healthier in the long run.
And that's where the concept of postponed emotions comes in.
Okay.
Sometimes we suppress intense emotions.
Right.
Maybe we're not in a safe space to let them out.
Yeah.
But later, even if the situation has changed, those pent-up feelings can come flooding out.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you might find yourself, listener, unexpectedly emotional when a situation resolves.
Huh.
Recognizing this pattern can really help you manage those intense feelings.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like delaying the emotional reaction, but not erasing it.
Exactly.
Does this tie into the idea of medicating grief at all?
The lecturer brings up a thought-provoking ethical dilemma around that very question.
Okay.
While medication can dull the sharp edges of grief, it might also interfere with natural coping mechanisms and even the social support that comes with shared grief.
So suppressing sadness, whether through medication or just holding it in, could actually hinder the healing process.
It's possible.
It makes you think about how we approach grief, both personally and as a society.
Definitely a complex issue with no easy answers. But understanding these different aspects of sadness can help us navigate those difficult emotions with more awareness.
Now let's move from sadness to anger. The lecture opens with such a striking image. Maxine Kenny, a mother who attacks her daughter's murderer right there in the courtroom.
Yeah, what a visceral reaction to unimaginable loss and anger.
Just that image alone throws us right into the intensity of that emotion.
Absolutely. The lecturer then breaks down the anger spectrum from mild annoyance to full-blown rage,
Okay.
highlighting that impulse to harm that often comes with anger.
So does that suggest that everyone has the potential for violence?
Well, that's where the concept of an anger gradient comes in.
An anger gradient.
Everyone has a different threshold for anger and a different capacity for explosive reactions.
So some people are just more prone to anger than others.
Think of it as a spectrum. Some people have a short fuse and reach their boiling point quickly.
Right.
Others are slow to anger and can tolerate a lot before reacting.
So understanding our own anger gradient and recognizing those early warning signs is crucial for keeping our anger in check.
Exactly. The lecture also dives into something they call unaware
Anger.
Unaware anger.
Imagine acting out aggressively without even realizing you're angry.
That's a little scary.
It's a state where anger simmers beneath the surface, driving behavior without conscious recognition.
So are we all just picking time bombs waiting to explode?
It's not about living in fear of our anger, but becoming more emotionally attentive. Paying attention to our internal state and recognizing the early signs, that tension, that heat rising, can help us catch anger before it escalates.
Just recognizing those subtle physical cues is key.
Precisely, the more aware we are of our own triggers and physical sensations, the better equipped we are to make conscious choices about how we respond to anger. It's about taking control rather than letting anger control us. So it's almost like learning to read our own internal anger barometer.
I like that.
What are my triggers?
Yeah,
What are the things that tend to set me off? And then how do I manage those feelings before they escalate?
exactly.
Well said.
It's all about self-awareness.
Speaking of control, let's shift gears to fear and surprise. The lecture pairs these two together, and they kick things off with a pretty vivid image. A truck tipping over. He sees the passengers just sheer terror in their faces.
It's a powerful illustration of how quickly surprise can morph into fear.
Right.
You see those wide eyes, raised eyebrows, that initial shock as they process what's happening, this unexpected event.
Yeah.
And then as the truck continues to tip, you see that surprise transform into fear. You can almost feel their terror through the image.
It's like our brains go into overdrive trying to make sense of the sudden change
Absolutely.
and assess the threat, but wouldn't surprise also trigger that fight or flight response. How does that play into the fear we see in that image?
That's a great point. The physical sensations of surprise, the racing heart, the quickened breath, they can definitely overlap with fear.
Yeah.
But the lecture argues there's a key difference.
Okay.
Surprise is primarily a cognitive response, a moment of mental scrambling as we adjust to the unexpected. Fear, on the other hand, is driven by the anticipation of harm.
So surprise is that split second, what just happened,
Yeah.
while fear is more about what's going to happen next.
Exactly.
I like that.
And the lecture digs deeper into that fear response, explaining how confronting a threat can actually make fear subside.
Really?
They share a personal anecdote about being on a plane that had to make an emergency landing.
Oh, wow.
Despite the imminent danger, the lecturer describes feeling a sense of detachment from the fear as they focused on following safety procedures.
It's like our survival instincts kick in and action overrides the fear. Have you ever experienced something similar where taking charge helped you overcome fear?
Absolutely. I think we've all had those moments where facing a challenge head on,
Right.
rather than shrinking back, can diminish the feeling of fear. The lecture contrasts this with what they call impending threats.
Okay.
Those situations where the danger isn't immediate, but the anticipation of it creates that anxiety and worry.
It's the difference between facing a charging bear and knowing there might be a bear in the woods. One triggers immediate action, the other keeps you constantly on edge.
Precisely.
Wow.
And that brings us to an interesting paradox. The lecture points out how fear can actually be enjoyable for some people.
Oh, yeah.
Think about those who love scary movies or thrill-seeking activities.
It's almost like they're intentionally putting themselves in those situations that trigger that fear response, maybe for the adrenaline rush or the sense of accomplishment after facing their fears. But for others, fear is completely debilitating, something they avoid at all costs.
That speaks to the wide range of individual fear sensitivity. Some people are naturally more prone to anxiety and fear, while others are more resilient and able to tolerate uncertainty and risk.
So it's all part of that fascinating spectrum of human emotion.
It really is.
Now, moving on to disgust, the lecture opens the section with a kind of amusing anecdote about this man in New Guinea who is utterly disgusted by canned food.
Oh, wow.
It just goes to show how cultural norms shape our disgust responses.
It really highlights how disgust isn't always about something inherently repulsive.
Right.
While some triggers, like bodily fluids, might be universally disgusting,
Yeah.
many others are learned through cultural conditioning, personal experiences, and even individual sensitivities.
Yeah, haven't we all been surprised by something that someone else finds disgusting or vice versa?
Absolutely. It makes you realize how subjective disgust can be.
It really does.
And the lecture breaks down disgust into these different categories.
Okay.
There's sensory disgust, triggered by things like taste, smell, or touch.
Yeah.
Then there's moral disgust, evoked by violations of ethical principles. And finally, social disgust, directed towards individuals or groups who violate social norms.
It makes you think about how disgust can be used to reinforce social hierarchies and maintain power dynamics. Think about historical examples of disgust being directed towards marginalized groups, often based on prejudice and unfounded fears.
That's a crucial point. The lecture argues that while disgust can serve as a protective mechanism, it can also be weaponized to justify discrimination and violence.
It's a reminder to critically examine our own disgust responses.
Yeah.
And to challenge those that stem from prejudice or harmful stereotype.
Exactly. We need to separate genuine moral concerns from those knee-jerk disgust reactions that might be based on unfounded fears or cultural biases.
So how can we use our knowledge of disgust in a more constructive way? Is there a way to harness that disgust energy for positive change?
The lecture suggests that disgust can be a powerful motivator for social justice and positive action.
Okay.
For example, feeling disgusted by injustice or cruelty
Yeah.
can fuel our desire to create a more equitable and compassionate society.
It's about channeling that visceral reaction into something that creates positive change rather than perpetuating harm.
Precisely. And speaking of disgust in relationships, let's talk about contempt, which the lecture describes as a particularly toxic emotion.
Oh, yeah.
It takes disgust to a whole new level by adding disdain and moral superiority to the mix.
Contempt is like looking down on someone, seeing them as inferior and unworthy of respect. And hasn't John Gottman's research shown that contempt is one of the biggest predictors of divorce?
Absolutely. The four horsemen of the apocalypse, as Gottman calls them, are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt.
Right.
And contempt is often the most damaging of the four. When it becomes a regular part of communication, it erodes trust, intimacy, and ultimately the foundation of the relationship.
It's almost like a slow poison chipping away at the connection until there's nothing left. And what's disturbing is how easily contempt can creep into our interactions,
Yeah,
even with people we care about.
absolutely. Have you ever noticed how quickly a simple eye roll or a sarcastic comment can escalate a disagreement?
Yep. It's like those subtle displays of contempt are little cracks in the foundation of the relationship. And if left unchecked, those cracks can widen and eventually cause the whole structure to crumble.
Exactly. And the lecture points out that contempt often manifests in a very specific facial expression.
Oh, really?
It's like a sneer frozen on half the face, instantly telling you this person sees you as beneath them.
So recognizing that expression both in ourselves and in others can be a powerful tool for navigating relationships and avoiding conflict.
Absolutely. It's about promoting healthy communication and fostering mutual respect, even when disagreements arise.
Now let's circle back to surprise for a moment. What exactly is surprise and why does it feel so fleeting?
The lecture defines surprise as a brief cognitive response to something unexpected. It's that wait what moment when our brains scramble to make sense of a sudden shift in our environment or expectations.
Yeah.
It's fleeting because once we've processed that unexpected event, the surprise fades away.
It's like that initial jolt of disorientation quickly fades as we adjust to the new reality. It makes me wonder, is surprise truly an emotion? Or is it more of a cognitive state, a mental hiccup?
That's an interesting question the lecture raises as well.
Yeah.
Well, surprise certainly feels like an emotion. It lacks the intensity and duration of other emotions like sadness or anger,
Right.
and it doesn't seem to have a distinct physiological or behavioral signature.
So maybe surprise is more like a mental reflex, a quick readjustment of our perception of the world.
Exactly. And speaking of facial expressions, the lecture describes the classic surprise expression as wide open eyes, raised eyebrows, and a gaping mouth.
It's like our faces are trying to take in as much information as possible
Yes.
to figure out what just happened.
Precisely. The wide eyes allow for a wider field of vision. The raised eyebrows enhance our ability to see, and the gaping mouth might be a reflex that prepares us to take in a sudden gasp of air.
But don't we often try to suppress our surprise in social situations? We don't want to seem naive or out of the loop.
That's true. We often learn to control our surprise reactions to maintain a sense of composure. But by doing so, are we sacrificing some genuine emotional expression?
It's a trade-off between authenticity and social grace. Maybe the key is finding a balance, allowing ourselves to express surprise when it's genuine,
Right.
while also being mindful of social cues and context.
That's a great point. It's about being aware of our own reactions and making conscious choices about how we express them.
Now let's dive back into fear, an emotion that often goes hand in hand with surprise. Earlier, we talked about how taking action can sometimes diminish fear, but what about those times when fear feels overwhelming and paralyzing?
The lecture explores those nuances of fear, pointing out that not all fear is created equal. Some fears are innate, like the fear of loud noises or sudden movements. These are hardwired into us for survival.
Right.
Other fears are learned through personal experiences or cultural conditioning.
So a fear of spiders might be learned while a fear of heights could be more innate.
Exactly. And the intensity of our fear response can vary depending on the perceived threat and our individual fear sensitivity. Some people experience fear as a mild discomfort, while others might be completely debilitated by it.
It's like some people have a higher tolerance for fear, while
Yeah.
others are more easily overwhelmed.
Precisely. And the lecture reminds us that fear is a natural human emotion, not a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's part of our evolutionary heritage, designed to protect us from danger.
But what about when fear becomes irrational or excessive?
Right.
When it interferes with our ability to live a normal life?
That's when it crosses over into the realm of anxiety disorders, which the lecture touches upon as well.
Okay.
Anxiety disorders involve persistent and debilitating fear and worry that can significantly impact daily functioning. But even for those who don't struggle with anxiety disorders, fear can still be a powerful emotion that requires understanding and management.
So what are some ways to manage fear, especially when it feels overwhelming?
The lecture offers a range of coping strategies,
Okay.
including deep breathing exercises,
Mhm.
progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness meditation, and cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that challenge negative thoughts and beliefs.
It's like building a toolkit of strategies to draw from when fear starts to take hold.
Exactly.
And sometimes simply acknowledging and validating our fear can be a powerful first step towards managing it.
Absolutely. Often trying to suppress or deny our fear only makes it stronger. By acknowledging and accepting our fear, we can begin to understand its roots and find healthier ways to cope.
Now, shifting our focus back to anger, the lecture introduces a particularly interesting concept, unaware anger. It's like being a ticking time bomb without even knowing it.
Unaware, anger is essentially acting out aggressively without recognizing that you're angry. It's anger simmering beneath the surface, driving behavior
Yeah.
without conscious recognition.
It's a bit unsettling to think that we might be capable of anger-driven actions without even realizing it.
That's why the lecture stresses the importance of becoming more emotionally attentive.
Okay.
By paying attention to our internal state and recognizing the early warning signs of anger, we can gain more control over our reactions.
So how can we become more aware of our anger, especially when it's operating beneath the surface? What are some signs to look out for?
The lecture suggests paying attention to physical sensations. Notice that tightness in your chest,
Oh,
the clenching of your fists,
right.
or the rise in your body temperature. These can be early indicators that anger is brewing.
It's like learning to read our own internal anger barometer.
Exactly. And keeping a journal can be helpful. Track your anger episodes and try to identify the triggers and underlying causes. What situations or people tend to provoke your anger? What thoughts or beliefs are fueling those angry feelings?
It's like becoming an emotional detective, uncovering the clues to our own anger patterns.
Precisely. And once we understand our triggers and patterns, we can start to develop strategies to manage our anger more effectively.
So is it even possible to completely control our anger, or are we always at its mercy?
The lecture presents a balanced perspective. They acknowledge that there are times when anger is justified and even necessary for self-protection or setting boundaries, but they caution against letting anger control us.
So it's about harnessing the energy of anger without letting it become destructive.
Exactly. They offer a range of strategies for managing anger, from simple techniques like taking deep breaths to more complex approaches like cognitive reframing and empathy building.
It's like creating a toolbox of anger management techniques, each suited for different situations and levels of intensity. But what about when our anger feels completely out of control?
Right.
What if we feel like we're about to explode?
The lecture stresses the importance of recognizing our limits and seeking professional help when necessary. Sometimes our anger might be a symptom of an underlying mental health condition, and therapy can provide us with the tools we need to heal and manage those emotions effectively.
It's a reminder that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Now, let's delve into a fascinating concept. The lecture introduces referential expressions.
Referential expressions are facial expressions we use to communicate emotions we experienced in the past but are not currently feeling. It's like using our face to tell a story about a past emotional experience.
So if I were recounting a frustrating experience I had, even though I'm not feeling frustrated in this moment, I might furrow my brows or tighten my lips to convey the frustration I felt during that past encounter.
Exactly. It's a way of adding emotional emphasis to our storytelling.
It's like using our facial expressions as a form of emotional punctuation.
Precisely, referential expressions allow us to share our emotional experiences with others, even when those emotions are no longer present.
But is there a risk of those referential expressions re-triggering the actual emotion?
The lecture warns against using full-blown emotional expressions when using referential expressions. Instead, they recommend using just a fragment of the expression,
Okay.
a slight brow furrow or a momentary lip press, to avoid triggering the actual emotion.
It's like dipping our toes into the emotional pool without fully diving in.
Exactly. It's a subtle but important distinction.
Now let's talk about the connection between emotions and personality. The lecture suggests that each emotion is linked to a specific personality trait.
Okay.
For example, sadness might be linked to a melancholic personality, anger to a hostile personality, and fear to a shy or timid personality.
These personality traits represent enduring patterns of emotional experience and behavior. They shape how we perceive the world, interact with others, and cope with challenges.
So our personalities are, in a way, a reflection of our dominant emotional patterns.
In a sense, yes. And the lecture also introduces the concept of emotional disorders, which they describe as extreme and debilitating manifestations of emotions.
Okay.
For example, depression is characterized by persistent and overwhelming sadness.
Right.
Anxiety disorders involve excessive and uncontrollable worry and fear, and anger disorders involve explosive and destructive rage.
It's a reminder that while emotions are a natural and essential part of the human experience, they can sometimes become dysregulated and interfere with our well-being.
And that's why it's so important to seek professional help when emotions become overwhelming or debilitating.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the world of emotions, what are some key takeaways that we can apply to our own lives?
The lecture emphasizes the importance of emotional awareness.
Okay.
Paying attention to our own emotions and the emotions of those around us, it's about becoming more attuned to those subtle cues, both in ourselves and in others.
They're like becoming fluent in the language of emotions.
Exactly. And then there's emotional regulation, learning to manage our emotions effectively and express them in healthy and constructive
All
ways.
right.
It's about building that emotional intelligence, that ability to understand and navigate the complex world of feelings.
And finally, the lecture reminds us that our understanding of emotions is constantly evolving.
hmm
There's always more to learn, more to explore. So let's approach this fascinating world with the sense of curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to keep learning and growing.
I completely agree.
It's like we're constantly fine-tuning our emotional compass, learning to navigate this ever-changing landscape of feelings.
That's a great analogy. It's an ongoing process of self-discovery and growth.
Speaking of growth, I found the lecture's perspective on the evolution of emotions really interesting. They argue that emotions developed over time to help us survive and thrive.
It's fascinating to consider emotions through that evolutionary lens. For example, fear helped our ancestors avoid danger, anger fueled their fight for survival, and disgust protected them from consuming harmful substances.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate the essential role emotions play in our lives. They're
Hmm.
not just these abstract feelings, they're deeply rooted in our biology and have shaped our development as a species.
Exactly. And the lecture highlights how emotions are not just about our individual survival, they also play a crucial role in our social interactions and relationships.
Like how emotions like empathy and compassion help us connect with others, build trust, and cooperate.
Precisely. And even emotions that might seem negative on the surface,
Right.
like anger or sadness, can serve important social functions.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? It seems counterintuitive that negative emotions could have a positive social impact.
Well, think about it this way. Anger can motivate us to fight for justice or protect ourselves from harm. Sadness can signal to others that we need support and comfort. Even disgust, which we often associate with revulsion and rejection, can play a role in maintaining social norms and protecting us from things that might be harmful.
So it's not about labeling emotions as good or bad, but understanding the purpose they serve in our lives and how they shape our interactions with the world around us.
Exactly, and the lecture encourages us to view emotions as a complex and nuanced system,
Yeah.
not a simple binary of positive and negative.
It's like we're all walking around with these intricate emotional dashboards, each with its own set of gauges and indicators constantly responding to internal and external cues.
I love that image. It captures the dynamic and ever-changing nature of emotions. And the more we understand about our own emotional dashboards, the better equipped we are to manage them effectively and live fulfilling lives.
So as we conclude our deep dive into the world of emotions, what are some final thoughts you'd like to share with our listener?
I'd say embrace curiosity. The world of emotions is endlessly fascinating and constantly evolving. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking questions. Pay attention to your own emotions, the emotions of others, and the intricate ways in which emotions shape our lives.
And remember, as we've discussed throughout this deep dive, emotions are not something to be feared or suppressed. They're an essential part of what makes us human.
Beautifully said.
So to our listener, we encourage you to continue to dive deep into the fascinating world of emotions. Until next time, keep exploring.